If you discovered that everyone you trusted was guilty of something unspeakable, and you had the power to destroy them all with a single night's work, would you light the match? This is a story of Tobias Hall, a stable hand on the Bellefontaine Plantation in St. James Parish, Louisiana, who spent 11 months collecting secrets like kindling. And on the night of October 13th, 1854, he lit 11 lanterns that would burn down an empire built on lies, blood, and stolen bodies. But what those lanterns revealed wasn't just the crimes of white masters. It was something far worse. Something that would turn friend against friend and make Tobias question whether truth was worth the cost of survival. By sunrise, 3 people would be dead, a plantation would be in ruins, and Tobias would vanish into history. But the 11 lanterns? They're still burning. Let me show you how. The night was thick with Louisiana humidity, the kind that made breathing feel like drowning. Tobias Hall moved through the darkness with 11 oil lanterns balanced in a wooden cart, each one fitted with colored glass he'd stolen over the course of a year. Red, blue, green, amber, clear. Each color meant something. Each placement, a message. The Bellefontaine estate sprawled across 900 acres of sugarcane fields along the Mississippi River, 20 miles south of Baton Rouge. The main house, a Greek Revival mansion with 6 white columns, sat on a small hill overlooking the quarters where 140 enslaved people lived, worked, and died. Tonight, the house was full. Master Nathaniel Bellefontaine was hosting a gathering. 12 plantation owners from across the parish, their wives, a federal marshal from New Orleans, and a visiting reporter from the New Orleans Daily Picayune, a man named James Whitmore, who'd been writing glowing profiles of Louisiana's agricultural prosperity. Tobias had planned this for 11 months. Every detail, every witness. Tonight, they'd all see what prosperity really looked like. He placed the first lantern, red glass, on the east corner of the overseer's cabin. The second, blue glass, beside the smokehouse. The third, green glass, near the old well behind the chapel. His hands shook, not from fear, from the weight of what he was about to do. Because once he lit the 11th lantern, there would be no going back. And somewhere in the dark, someone was watching him. Tobias Hall was 28 years old, born enslaved on Bellefontaine, just like his mother and grandmother before him. He worked the stables, 16 horses, 2 carriages, and a reputation for being quiet, efficient, invisible. That invisibility had kept him alive. But it hadn't saved Ruth. Ruth was 19, sweet-faced, a house servant who sang hymns while she worked and braided wildflowers into her hair on Sundays. She and Tobias had been married. Not legally, because enslaved people couldn't legally marry, but in the way that mattered, jumping the broom behind the quarters on a June evening 2 years prior, with 30 witnesses and a prayer spoken by Reverend Moses, an old man who preached in whispers. Ruth was carrying their child, for months along. That's when Carter Bellefontaine, Nathaniel's eldest son, 23 and cruel, in the careless way of men who've never been told no, decided he wanted her. It started with looks, then comments, then late-night summons to the main house that Ruth couldn't refuse. Tobias complained to Duncan Price, the head overseer, a thick-necked man from Tennessee with a scar splitting his eyebrow. "Keep your woman in line," Duncan had said, "and she won't get noticed." But it wasn't about keeping her in line. It was about power. One night in late November, Ruth came back to the quarters with her dress torn and her face blank. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, just sat on the edge of their bed, staring at nothing. 3 days later, she miscarried. A week after that, she walked into the Mississippi River and didn't come back. They found her body a mile downstream, caught in the roots of a cypress tree. Nathaniel Bellefontaine gave Tobias 1 day to grieve, then told him to get back to work. Carter never said a word, never even looked at Tobias. And that's when something inside Tobias Hall went cold and sharp and patient. He wouldn't run. He wouldn't lash out. He would destroy them. Slowly, methodically, publicly. The lanterns weren't just lights. They were a code. For 11 months, Tobias had been collecting evidence, not the kind you could hold in your hand. There were no courts that would hear him, no laws that cared, but the kind that lived in whispered stories, in scars, in bodies buried where they shouldn't be. He'd listened, watched, remembered, and he'd found 11 crimes so damning that even white men couldn't ignore them, if they were forced to see. The red lantern marked the overseer's cabin, where Duncan Price kept a second set of books, records showing he'd been skimming profits and selling Bellefontaine sugarcane to a competitor in Ascension Parish. The blue lantern marked the smokehouse, where Carter Bell Fountain had beaten a 12-year-old boy named Simon to death 2 years ago for stealing a ham. The body was buried in the floor under the salting racks. The green lantern marked the old well, when Nathaniel's brother, Vincent Bell Fountain, who managed a cotton gin, had dumped arsenic to poison a rival planter's water supply during a land dispute in 1851. And so on. 11 crimes. 11 lanterns. But Tobias had one more secret. He wasn't working alone. Tobias was placing the fourth lantern, amber glass, beside the sugar mill, when he heard footsteps. He froze, crouched in the shadows. Who's there? The voice belonged to Amos Garrett, one of the white overseers. Young, nervous, new to Bell Fountain. He carried a rifle and a lantern of his own. Tobias held his breath. Amos walked closer, boots crunching gravel. 10 feet away. 8. 6. Tobias's hand moved to the knife tucked in his belt, a small, rust-spotted thing he used for cutting leather straps in the stable. If Amos saw him, if Amos raised the alarm. But then another voice called out from the direction of the main house. Garrett, get back here. Master Bell Fountain wants more whiskey brought up. Amos hesitated, glancing toward Tobias's hiding spot one more time. Then he turned and walked away. Tobias exhaled. Too close. He moved faster now. Obias wasn't doing this alone. Over the past 11 months, he quietly built a network of 5 people, each one carrying their own grief, their own reason to risk everything. Reverend Moses, 74 years old, blind in one eye, the spiritual backbone of Quarters. He didn't believe in violence, but he believed in truth. He'd agreed to help Tobias on one condition. No one innocent would be harmed. Delilah, a cook in the main house, 43, sharp as a blade. She had access to the family's private conversations and knew every secret whispered over dinner. She'd lost 2 sons to sale. She wanted blood, but she'd settle for ruin. Ezekiel, a field hand, 19, fast and fearless. His sister had been one of Carter's victims. He'd volunteered to place the most dangerous lanterns, the ones closest to the main house. Iris, a laundress, 25, who could read and write, taught in secret by a Quaker schoolteacher years ago. She'd been keeping written records of every crime she witnessed, hidden in a Bible. And finally, Amos Garrett. Yes, the same overseer who'd almost caught Tobias. Because Amos Garrett had a secret too. Tobias met Ezekiel behind the chapel, where the 6th and 7th lanterns were waiting. Delilah says the reporter's drunk. Ezekiel whispered. Whitmore, from the newspaper. He's asking questions about the quarters, about how the workers are treated. Nathaniel's getting nervous. Good, Tobias said. Let him be nervous. And Carter? Tobias's jaw tightened. Where is he? Upstairs. In his room. Delilah thinks he's got one of the new girls up there. Rage flickered in Tobias's chest. But he forced it down. Not yet. Not tonight. The 8th lantern goes in front of his window, Tobias said. Ezekiel's eyes widened. That's the signal for... I know what it signals. The 8th lantern was black glass. It marked the place where a crime was still happening. Tobias had been in the stables late one night, mending a bridle, when he'd heard voices outside. 2 men, arguing in harsh whispers. He peeked through a gap in the wood and saw Nathaniel Bell Fountain and Duncan Price, the overseer. You're stealing from me, Duncan. I'm earning from you, Nathaniel. There's a difference. I've got the ledgers. I know you've been selling my cane to Arsenault. Then fire me. See how long this place runs without me. A long silence. Then Nathaniel laughed. A cold, ugly sound. You think you've got leverage? I've got a federal marshal in my pocket, and enough friends in Baton Rouge to bury you in a swamp. But I'm a reasonable man. Give me half of what you've skimmed, and we'll call it even. Duncan spat. Fine. And just like that, Tobias understood. They were all guilty. Every single one of them. Master and overseer. Father and son. The men who ran this place were a den of thieves and murderers, feeding off each other and the people they enslaved. And if Tobias could expose all of them at once, turn them against each other, the whole rotten structure might collapse. That's when the plan truly began. The 11 lanterns were more than evidence. They were a map. Tobias had learned that James Whitmore, the newspaper reporter, wasn't just in town to write puff pieces. He was investigating rumors of corruption among Louisiana's planter class, skimming, bribery, even murder. But Whitmore needed proof, and Tobias was going to give it to him. The plan was simple. Light the 11 lanterns in a specific pattern across the plantation. Each lantern's color and location corresponded to a crime, a place, and a person. Iris had written a key, a coded map, that Tobias would deliver to Whitmore. At 1 a.m., Reverend Moses would ring the chapel bell, a signal for fire or emergency, drawing everyone outside. Whitmore, confused and curious, would follow, and he'd see the lanterns. Delilah would make sure Whitmore got the map. Ezekiel would create chaos to cover their tracks. Amos Garrett, the overseer, would make sure no one extinguished the lanterns before Whitmore saw them. But why would a white overseer help enslaved people destroy his own employers? Because Amos Garrett had a sister. And 2 years ago, Nathaniel Bell Fountain had assaulted her during a business trip to Natchitoches. She'd killed herself a month later. Amos had come to Bell Fountain for one reason: revenge. When Tobias had discovered this, overheard Amos drunk and weeping in the overseer's cabin. He'd made a deal. "Help me," Tobias had said, "and I'll help you bury him." Amos had agreed. Tobias had just placed the 10th lantern, white glass, near the family cemetery when Delilah came running. "It's Iris," she gasped. "She's been caught." Tobias's blood turned to ice. "What?" Carter found her in the main house. She had the map, the written key. No. Where is she?" "They locked her in the root cellar. Duncan's with her. He's asking questions." If Iris talked, they were all dead. Tobias's mind raced. He had one lantern left, the 11th, the most important one. But if he didn't stop Duncan, if Iris gave them up, none of it would matter. Where's Ezekiel? He's ready, waiting for your signal. Tobias made a choice. Tell him to ring the bell. Now! But it's not 1 o'clock yet. Do it! Delilah ran. 30 seconds later, the chapel bell began to toll. The bell shattered the night like breaking glass. People poured out of the main house. Planters in waistcoats, wives in shawls, enslaved servants confused and frightened. Nathaniel Bell Fountain stood on the front portico, shouting, "What the hell is going on?" Duncan Price emerged from the root cellar, dragging Iris by the arm. Her face was bruised, but she was smiling because she hadn't broken. And now, with everyone outside, they could see the lanterns. 10 of them, glowing in the dark like eyes. Red, blue, green, amber, yellow, orange, purple, black, white, pink. James Whitmore, the reporter, stood beside Nathaniel, staring. What is this?" Whitmore asked. "Some kind of prank." Nathaniel snapped. "Probably runaways signaling." "It's a code," Amos Garrett said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Amos stepped forward, his face pale, but his voice steady. "Each lantern marks a place. A crime. I know, because I helped put them there." Nathaniel's face went white. "You what?" "The red one's at Duncan's cabin. Check his floorboards. You'll find a second ledger showing he's been stealing from you for 2 years." Duncan lunged at Amos, but 2 other overseers grabbed him. "You traitorous son of a—" "The blue one's at the smokehouse," Amos continued, his voice louder now. "There's a child buried under the floor, 12 years old. Carter beat him to death." Carter Bell Fountain, standing near his father, went rigid. "That's a lie." "Dig it up," Amos said. "Prove me wrong." James Whitmore was scribbling furiously in a notebook. Nathaniel grabbed Whitmore's arm. "You can't. This is slander. These are lies from slaves and a disgraced overseer." But Whitmore pulled free. "Then let's check. If it's all lies, you've got nothing to hide." And that's when Tobias stepped out of the shadows, holding the 11th lantern, gold glass. He walked slowly toward the main house, toward the crowd, toward the man who'd taken everything from him. "This one," Tobias said, his voice steady, "is for Ruth." He placed a golden lantern at Nathaniel Bell Fountain's feet. "It marks the man who let his son destroy my wife, my child, and my life, and did nothing." The crowd went silent. Nathaniel stared at Tobias, his face twisting with rage and fear. "You're a dead man," he whispered. "Maybe," Tobias said, "but so are you." What happened next, no one expected. One of the planters in the crowd, Henry Arsenault, a rival sugarcane grower, stepped forward. "I'll testify," he said. Nathaniel spun. "Henry, don't." "I'll testify that Duncan Price sold me Bell Fountain cane at below market rates. I've got receipts. Contracts." Another planter spoke up. "And I've got letters from Vincent Bell Fountain about the arsenic." One by one, the white men began turning on each other, not out of morality, out of greed. Because if Nathaniel Bell Fountain went down, his land would be auctioned, his assets liquidated, and every one of these men wanted a piece. Tobias watched, stunned. He hadn't just exposed crimes. He'd triggered a feeding frenzy. But the real twist? James Whitmore wasn't just a reporter. He was an abolitionist, a member of the American Anti-Slavery Society, sent south to gather evidence of slavery's brutality for northern newspapers. And Tobias had just handed him the story of the decade. By dawn, the parish sheriff had arrived. Duncan Price was arrested for theft and murder. Carter Bell Fountain was taken into custody after they found Simon's body in the smokehouse, exactly where the Blue Lantern had marked. Vincent Bell Fountain fled and was never seen again. Nathaniel Bell Fountain wasn't arrested. Men like him rarely were. But his reputation was obliterated. Within 6 months, Bell Fountain Plantation was foreclosed. The enslaved people were sold off, a horror Tobias had known was inevitable, but still felt like failure. But James Whitmore's article, published in the New York Tribune and reprinted across the North, became a rallying cry for abolitionists. The 11 lanterns of Bell Fountain became a symbol, a story of resistance, of enslaved people weaponizing truth. And though Tobias's name was never mentioned, Whitmore protected his sources. The story lived. Tobias, Delilah, Ezekiel, Reverend Moses, and Iris vanished the night of the lanterns. Amos Garrett helped them. He arranged for a boat, a smuggler's skiff, to take them upriver to Memphis, then overland to Ohio. It took 4 months. They traveled the Underground Railroad, passing through safe houses in Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky. Reverend Moses died in transit pneumonia just outside of Louisville. They buried him beneath a willow tree and said the prayers he'd taught them. But the others made it. By March of 1855, Tobias, Delilah, Ezekiel, and Iris were living in Oberlin, Ohio, a town known for its abolitionist community and integrated schools. Tobias never remarried, but he became a carpenter, built homes for freedmen, and on quiet nights, he'd carve small wooden lanterns. 11 of them. He'd paint them in colored glass and give them to children, telling them, light always reveals the truth, even in the darkest places. Here's what history doesn't tell you. In 1856, Amos Garrett returned to Louisiana. He testified in a civil suit against the remaining Bell Fountain family, helping to ensure that their wealth was scattered, their name disgraced. But in 1858, Amos was found dead in a New Orleans boarding house. Poison. No one was ever charged. Some say it was Carter Bell Fountain, released from jail and hungry for revenge. Some say it was another planter, silencing a traitor. But in Oberlin, Ohio, when Tobias heard the news, he lit 11 lanterns outside his home. A vigil, a tribute, a reminder. And here's the question I'll leave you with. Tobias didn't free anyone. The people of Bell Fountain were still sold, still enslaved. His revenge didn't end slavery. It just burned down one house of cards. So is it worth it? Is exposing the truth enough, even when the system stays intact? Or is the act of resistance, of refusing to stay silent, its own kind of freedom? Because the 11 lanterns didn't destroy slavery, but they lit a fire in the minds of everyone who heard the story. And sometimes, that's where revolutions begin. In 1889, a historian visiting Oberlin, Ohio, found 11 stained glass lanterns in the attic of an old freedman's church, each one a different color. Each one still burning with oil that should have run out decades ago. No one could explain it. But the people of Oberlin didn't need an explanation. They knew some lights never go out.